So please give a warm welcome to my brother-in-law, Werner.
Many thanks, Daniel. You know, I was invited here a couple weeks ago, and I talked to some of the guys at the 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. deal, and for some reason, they invited me back. So I said to myself, I'm going to give the most depressing, the heaviest talk I can possibly give. Amen. And Daniel will not make that mistake again. But really, it is a heavy, depressing talk. My talk is entitled, Making Sense Out of Suffering. Come on. And let me be honest with you, there's not a whole lot of sense you can make out of suffering, right? Okay? We get a 6-year-old kid who gets cancer, and we have a mafia hitman that does it. We have a restaurant in Afghanistan being blown up, and the guys who plotted it live another day. And how about in this room? Is there not brokenness in this room? Yeah. Is there not suffering in this room? Yeah. Is there not fear in this room? Yeah. We all have pain, right? Amen. Homelessness, addictions, Amen. Being rejected by people who are supposed to care for us, Amen. Being abandoned by people who are supposed to love us, physical illness, joblessness, homelessness. And we say, where is God? Where is God in that? Everything around us seems to disprove the existence of God, or at least the loving and all-powerful God. Okay? We sit in a Christian chapel and we talk about God, but let's be honest. Look at our lives. We cause pain by being born. We cause pain most of our lives. We mostly die in pain. Right? And here's the added kicker for us humans. We have intelligence, right? Yes. So not only do we experience pain, we have the capacity to think back, to remember the pain we felt, to foresee the pain we're going to feel in the future. That's a lot of pain in our lives. St. Thomas Aquinas said that the existence of evil and suffering is truly the only valid argument against the existence of God. And surely he's right? If God is all good, he would will all good and no evil, right? And if God is all powerful, he would accomplish everything he wills, right? Okay? But evil and suffering still exist. So let me get this straight. So God's either not all powerful or he's not all good. To put it another way, if there's an all powerful and all good God, and suffering and evil exist, then he must want those things to happen, right? Or if he doesn't want them to happen, he's not all powerful. So that's the problem we have for this next 40 minutes or so. So before talking about the why in suffering, let's talk about the how. Couldn't the good and all-powerful God create a world without suffering? Yeah. The answer is yeah, he could. And he did. It was called Eden. And we screwed it up. Okay? God created us to love him. Amen. And in order to love him freely, we have to be able to not love him freely. Okay? And to some degree, we have all not loved him freely. Some of us to a very great extent. So in Genesis, God creates Adam and Eve. And they were happy. But they sinned. And the whole place collapsed. Adam and Eve said, hey, God, we want a place where we can say, my will be done. Amen. Not thy will be done. And of course, there isn't such a place, is there? So he created us to live in Eden, perfection. But our sin caused us to be exiled. You guys as kids ever have those magnets? You have a magnet, you put a paper clip, and another paper clip, and another paper clip, right? And you're a kid, you're amazed. Yeah, I got this magnet, and there's 10 paper clips hanging off it, okay? All right? Our world is like that. God is the magnet. That first paper clip, that's our souls being closest to God. Amen. The next one, our minds, our bodies, our world, right? What happens to that chain of paper clips when you pull the first one off? They all fall down. That's good. So to a very real extent, Once we separate ourselves from God through sin, the whole chain fell apart. And sin and suffering entered the world. So what's the answer? I'm going to give you a bunch of clues. For those guys who were here a couple weeks ago when I spoke, I talked about happiness. Okay? And I think most of us can agree that happiness is a good thing. Right? It's a good goal for each of us. We each seek happiness in our lives. And you may not, it may seem strange, but hey, God's the same way. He only wants happiness in your life. He loves us and wants us to be truly happy. Here's the difference. How we define happiness. And there's a big difference between how God wants us to be happy and how our culture views happiness. God wants us to be happy. As I told the men before, last couple Wednesdays or Fridays ago, the word happy comes from the Greek word meaning good soul. Okay? Not good food, good times, good drink, good sex, good soul. That's what happy means.
Yeah.
Happy, to be happy is to be good. However, in this world that we live in, we pursue pleasure with everything that we have. We are totally blind to what true happiness is. We live our lives with a belief that happiness is just a physical or emotional feeling. Think about parents who make their kids do homework. Man, that's suffering. You guys ever do homework? Right? Are those parents making their kids do homework sacrificing their kids' happiness? No. 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 They're looking at the long-term happiness of accomplishment, of graduating, of learning something. We are told by God himself that there's 4 words to our happiness. 4 little words. Thy will be done. But we live our lives with 4 little words that prevent that happiness from ever occurring. My will be done. Think about this for a second. Isn't the essence of our lives, of what we think is happy, what gives my life meaning? Okay? To the Christian, our lives have meaning by being good. For the world out there, our lives have meaning by feeling good. Okay? And if you're in the modern world, feeling good is not compatible with suffering. But for the Christian, suffering may have a place in our lives if we derive meaning from it. And by this standard, God might be good if he lets us suffer, if he does it for the greater end of our happiness. Like the parent making their kid do homework for the greater end of learning something. Let's say a doctor told me I had a tumor. I might be willing to go to take surgery, right, to get rid of that tumor. Short-term pain for long-term gain. I am to go to the pain of surgery for the long-term gain of not having a tumor in my body. Unfortunately, our selfish culture doesn't even realize there's a tumor out there. And you know what tumor I'm talking about? Tumor of sin, right, sir?
Right.
Yeah. And if we don't think we're sick, the concept of undergoing surgery to remove it makes no sense. Mind-blowing for the modern world. God's up there saying, happiness is freedom from the tumor of sin. And we in our modern day, all we can say is, I'll do anything to avoid the surgery. As that tumor continues to grow in our soul. Think of suffering like this. I want X, I get Y, right? I suffer because I wanted X and didn't get it. And I didn't want Y and I got it, right? I wanted a BMW, I got a bike. I wanted a nice house, I got a bed in a homeless shelter. Okay? Our modern world says, hey, there's a gap between what I want and what I have. Here's what changed that gap. Just want more. Get more, have more. That'll eliminate the gap. The Christian says, thy will be done. All right? The Christian eliminates the gap by saying, it doesn't matter what I want, Lord. Your will be done.
Hallelujah.
The Christian eliminates that by saying, hey, here's the gap. what do I have? What does God want? That's a tiny gap. That doesn't mean that suffering is God's will. I don't mean to say that. I do mean to say that God may permit it to happen in our lives in order to further His purpose.
That's right.
But we have to surrender ourselves to Him.
There it is. Come on.
Thy will be done transforms our suffering. I'll tell you later on how God compensates us for our suffering. But we need to love Him alone, will Him alone, worship Him alone.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Feeling good as our highest goal is not compatible with suffering.
No.
Being good is, right?
Correct.
And the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate act of suffering, the crucifixion of Christ, is also the ultimate act of good.
Amen.
That's why we celebrate that crucifixion as Good Friday, even though something really bad happened to Jesus.
That's right.
So if our ultimate goal was feeling good, is it any wonder in our society why no one believes in God? If our highest good is feeling good, then the God who lets us feel bad can't be worth respecting. But if our ultimate goal, if our ultimate good is being good, not feeling good, then maybe there exists room for a God who lets us feel bad. Give at least to our being good. Like the pain of surgery leading to the good of being free from tumor. And with the tumor of sin, that's long-term suffering. Eternity, huh? Okay. When I was young, there were no Xboxes, no PlayStations. There were 5 TV channels. Okay, that's a lot of gray hair. Okay. And so we played outside a lot. And you climb fence, you get splinters in your finger, right? Man, that was one of my worst experiences because I knew my dad came home, he would get that needle out, and he would dig that splinter out of your finger, right? And I feared that so much, both because of the pain and everything else. And in my immaturity, I failed to realize digging that needle out or that splinter out now prevents long-term suffering. That needle staying in here, that needle or that splinter getting infected. All right.
Correct.
Is God sort of like that? He's like my dad, digging into us with that needle for our long-term good.
Yeah. Come on.
Even though we feel short-term pain,
Yeah.
there's a difference though. Just speaking of myself, that splinter in my hand is nothing compared to sin in my soul. So God may be digging a little deeper in me. Okay? Here's a second clue I've got for you on suffering. Abraham. Suffering gives us the opportunity to freely choose God. Okay? When my will is the same as God's will, how do I know if I'm going to obey God, right? If my mom feeds me broccoli, and I like broccoli, well, how do I know if I'm going to obey her? Unless she gives me something I don't like, right? Suffering allows us to make that choice. To choose God instead of me. Choose God's will instead of my will. So let's go back to Abraham. Abraham had this son, Isaac, right? Great little boy. And God said, Abraham, I need you to do me something. I need you to go kill your son. Okay? Wow. Can you imagine the suffering that we would experience if someone said, hey, I need you to kill your boy? All right? Now, God's outside of time, right? God's all-knowing. God knew what Abraham was going to decide before he asked the question. That's not the point. Abraham did not know what Abraham was going to decide until he got to the question. Okay? Abraham couldn't know until he was called upon by God to find out if his willingness to surrender to God's will could survive such an awful thing. God didn't make the request for God's sake. God made it for Abraham's sake.
Amen.
To confirm in Abraham that his faith would lead him to surrender his will to God's. Hey, if you hadn't read the story, he passed. Suffering's like that in our lives, right? It's an opportunity for us to choose God's way when it's adverse to my way. Clue number 3, Job. You guys remember Job?
Yeah.
He starts off, he's a high respected guy in the community. He's got lots of possessions. He's got lots of friends. He's got a great family. He's got good health. And I'll just take it away one by one. Okay? He loses his wealth. He loses possessions. He loses his family. He gets a terrible disease. And he's sitting literally on a pile of poop with all the sores, saying, God, why are you doing this? God, I'm a good person. Why are you doing this to me? Why do bad things happen to good people? So finally God appears. And God's answer was, you asking me questions and want answers? I'll ask the questions. Were you there when I created the earth? Were you there when I created the mammals and the birds and the fishes? Were you there when I created the sunset and the sunrise? Hey, just be still. Know that I'm God, that you're not God, and I have a plan for you. Don't clap. Job had a serious question. Why am I suffering? And God's answer is, don't sweat it. I've got the plan.
Amen.
You just need to know that you're in it. Okay? And Job is joyful about this.
Yes.
The reason we celebrate Job is because of his ability to say, okay, I get it. Lord, you are God, I am not. But you have a plan, I'm happy with that. Even if I don't know what that plan is.
That's right.
Isn't it humbling?
Yes. It is.
Not knowing where you're going?
Yes.
That humility pays off
Yes.
if there's trust in the one that's leading you, though. And that's Job's wisdom. I trust the one leading, my God Almighty.
Amen.
Clue number 4, humility. Someone mentioned this before when I was talking about good things happen to bad people, or bad things happen to good people. And it's a right-on answer. We ask, why do bad things happen to good people? And then we remember the words of the most famous person ever lived, no one's good but God alone.
Amen.
We have sinned. We are spiritually sick. And Jesus said, those who are well have no need for a physician. But those who are sick, yeah, me, I came not to call the righteous but the sinners. And let's be honest, the surgery that Dr. Jesus requires, it can be pretty severe. Okay? Pretty radical, often painful. Especially when we are convinced that we are good people. Okay? The surgery to remove pride and lack of humility, serious stuff. And in our day where there is no such thing as sin, and let's face it, 90% of people, there's no sin. It's a lifestyle choice. There's no recognition that we are sick. That we have an incurable disease called death. Because you remember St. Paul? The wages of sin are death. Yeah. So if suffering is a medicine that God prescribes for our sickness of sin, there should be no surprise that we reject it. Because we believe we have no illness. St. Bernard of Clairvaux. If you can tell, I'm Catholic, so I bring up these saints a lot. St. Bernard of Clairvaux said the 4 cardinal virtues. 4 cardinal virtues. Humility, 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 and humility. Nothing gives us humility. Nothing gives us humility like being whacked off our feet. So hopefully, we land on our knees. And there's no better example of humility than Jesus Christ, Son of God, dying for us.
Amen.
Clue number 5, hot water.
Hey.
I spent many years as a youth minister in a Catholic church, and we had a junior high group then. That's why I used to give this example. So we often talk about getting into hot water in our lives, right? And we say we are in hot water. What do we mean? Trouble. Times are tough. We're in trouble. Exactly. Hot water is certainly a good metaphor for my life. How about you guys? Yeah? Hot water? What happens if we put things in hot water? Yeah. You put a carrot in hot water. What happens? It turns mushy.
It's all soft.
Right? You put an egg in hot water. What happens? It turns hard. You put a coffee bean in hot water, what happens? It flavors the water. It fulfills its purpose. Okay? Some of us are carrots. It's true. In hot water, we go soft and give up. Some of us are eggs in hot water. We get hard of heart, bitter. All of us are called to be Jesus. All of us are called to be coffee beans in hot water when times get tough. Jesus was the ultimate coffee bean. Was the water any more scalding than on Calvary? Right? But he flavored the world. Just like coffee bean flavors hot water. He realized his true purpose like a coffee bean by being in hot water. I told the junior high kids, these are 6th or 7th graders, I told them, hey, the highest compliment you can give someone, call them a coffee bean. Someone uses the tough times to bring out their purpose and to flavor the world around them, just like Jesus did, just like Jesus asks us to do. Clue number 6, cross-training. You know, maybe our role here on earth isn't fulfilled here, all right? Maybe it's not fulfillment, maybe it's preparation, okay? Maybe suffering wouldn't contradict a good God if it was used for training. The point of Christianity, this ain't our home.
That's right.
Heaven's our home.
Amen.
And so maybe God gives us our struggles to prevent us from getting too comfortable with this place. To recognize that, hey, these are just potholes. Potholes on the road to eternity, to heaven. Christ conquered the world by suffering. And he calls us to see the power of suffering in our lives as well. To look at a world where saints are made, not comfort and pleasure are one. This place we call Earth, it's a lousy home. But it's a great gymnasium. Right? It and the troubles it provides are great places to grow spiritual strength. Like a weightlifter who is straining under the weight, right? That's what our troubles are here. But we keep at it, we persevere, our spiritual strength grows and grows. And sometimes it gets heavy, right? Sometimes we just can't do it anymore. We need a spotter, right? And who's that spotter? Jesus. Absolutely. He's there. He's there to say, hey, let me help you with that load. Let me help you with that load. Let me ease the burden when the weights get too heavy.
Amen.
And if we look to Jesus as our spotter, our training continues. We will grow stronger. Again, the point of our existence here on earth, it's not pleasure or comfort or security. No, it's training. Cross-training, right? Clue number 7. I'm going Old Testament on you guys here. Malachi. I love this passage from Malachi 3. If you're looking at 3 chapters 1 or verses 1 to 3. Malachi tells us the Lord is coming. Who will endure the day of his coming? Who can stand where he appears? Here's the money shot. For he is like the refiner's fire. He will sit refining and purifying, refining them like gold. The Lord is like a refiner's fire.
Amen.
Okay? Now back in the day of Malachi, gold was refined by heating it up to extreme temperatures.
Correct.
Okay? Because the ore had a lot of impurities in it. And gold was really heavy. So if you heat that stuff up really, really hot, it would all melt and the gold would sink to the bottom and the impurities would rise to the top. Okay? And the refiner would heat the gold up, scrape off those impurities, heat it up again, scrape off the impurities, heat it up again, scrape off the impurities. And when the refiner could see his face in the gold, he knew it was pure.
Amen.
You say amen, but my brothers and sisters,
A lot of fire.
God's going to turn the heat up on you. And when he does, when the heat's turned up on you, as it always is, right? When the heat's turned up on you, what impurities in your life are going to rise to the surface? When the heat's on, what impurities are going to become evident?
Bring it out.
When the heat's on, will you allow God to scrape off the impurities?
Yes.
When the heat's on, will you use the struggles in your life as opportunities to be refined? Because know this. If you let God, the divine refiner, into your life, the heat that you face in your life will be used by Him to remove your impurities,
That's right.
to make you pure. So pure, hopefully, He can see His face in you.
Amen, amen.
Come on.
Clue number 8. Clue number 8, the man born blind. We're on 8 clues already. Can you dig it? So Jesus, in John chapter 9, tells a story of a man born blind. The gospel reads as follows. As he walked along, Jesus saw a man who'd been blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, was it his sin or that of his parents that caused him to be born blind? Neither, answered Jesus. It was no sin either of this man or of his parents. Rather, it was to let God's work show forth in him. Okay? You see, in the Old Testament, suffering like blindness and disease, it was supposed to come from your parents or something you did, some sin you or your parents had, right? And if you remember Job, if you read the book of Job, his 3 friends keep badgering him. You know, he keeps losing his possessions and his family. Job, what did you do to piss off God, right? And Jesus said, that's not it, right? The man's blindness is an opportunity, what? An opportunity for God's work to show forth.
Amen.
What an incredible concept. Suffering is bad, but it's an opportunity to do good. An opportunity to build the kingdom here on earth.
Amen.
An opportunity to share Christ's good work. You guys remember St. Thomas the Apostle? Yep. He died at Christ's resurrection. I'm not going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead until I can stick my finger into the nail holes and my hand into his side. So Jesus appears to him. Hey, Thomas, let me show you something. Get your finger. Right? Get your hand. Right? Thomas put his fingers in the wounds of Christ and said, my Lord. Right?
Yes.
He was able to recognize Jesus in the wounds of Christ. We are all supposed to be Thomas. Okay? Christ calls us the same way. Not to put our hands in the wounds of Jesus, but to put our hands in the wounds of the world. Right? To experience Jesus through the wounds, the hurts, the sufferings, the pains of our neighbors. That's how we find Jesus. Jesus said it. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians. We are all part of the body of Christ. If one member of the body suffers, all the members suffer with it. Thomas finds Christ through Christ's wounds, his suffering. We are called to do the same. Clue number 9. Jesus, divine garbage man. So we've talked about suffering as an opportunity to learn and live humility, right? To recognize that we are not God, but that Christ is. We talk about suffering as an opportunity to grow in wisdom, to seek out Christ, the true source of happiness. And we talk about suffering as an opportunity to seek out or to see Christ in others. Now, let's talk about Christ as the solution to the problem of our suffering. Because our suffering takes on a whole different meaning, a whole different purpose when it is united with Jesus's. God's not some guy who created this world and left it by himself. He's not a slumlord.
Nope.
It's a slum here. He's not a slumlord.
Amen.
We don't worship a slumlord God.
No, sir.
We worship a divine garbage man.
Yeah.
A God who entered the slum.
Yeah.
A God who cleaned up the slum. A God who cleaned up the garbage we threw at him.
Come on.
A God who became our garbage man, who touched our garbage.
Come on.
As the prophet Isaiah wrote in chapter 53, by his wounds we were healed.
Amen.
Christ became light to our slum by entering its darkness, by being subjected to its darkness. And by rising from the dead, he changed the meaning of death. Not only from the moment we finally die and lose our last breath, but the 1,000 little deaths we suffer throughout our life. He shares with our struggles. He shares our sorrows. He understands our deepness. He's like water, right?
Yeah.
It's like pouring water down a hole. However deep that hole is, that water finds the bottom of it and lifts up, right? Christ is our water. He'll fill that hole of ours. When we contemplate the pain, the sorrow, the loneliness, the abandonment, the hurts we experience, Jesus is right there saying, yo, I was there too, and I'm there with you now.
Yeah. Amen. Hallelujah.
He is there with us. We suffer abuse and addiction. He's there with us when our employers fire us. He is there with us when our bank account is empty and there are bills that haven't been paid. Right? He is there with us when we are rejected and lied about. He is there when we experience sickness. Our aches are his aches. Our pains are his pains. Our sufferings are his sufferings. His part's finished. He said so on the cross, right? Our part is still ongoing. Because it calls for us to have faith to receive the brokenness that's in our lives. And let God work through it. For us to offer the brokenness to him. So that he can use it in ways that amaze and astound us. For a Christian, suffering is an invitation to follow Christ. He called it. Christ came down from heaven to die on a cross, and he invites us to do the same. Suffering is blessed, not because of suffering, but because Jesus made it his. So how did Christ solve the problem of suffering? Well, first he came and suffered with us. As kids, any of you guys ever had those little ant farms? Little plastic thing that you put ants in, they do a colony? Can you imagine me or you saying, man, those ants down there, they're fighting. I'm going to become an ant and save them, right? The difference between God and us is infinitely more than between us and those ants. But he came down and became one of us. To live with us, die with us. By becoming man, he transformed the meaning of suffering. God's suffering through Christ, his invitation for us to do the same, allows us to be part of his work of redemption. Allows us. What an amazing gift.
Amen.
Third, he died and rose. He transforms death from an end to a beginning. Another saint reference, St. Teresa of Avila said, hey, because of Christ's incredible gift, from heaven, the most miserable earthly life will look like one bad night in a bad hotel.
Come on.
St. Paul, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that awaits us. Clue number 10, the fairy tale. So again, I was a youth minister in a Catholic church. And in the Catholic tradition, there's a number of things called sacraments. And the last sacrament of initiation is called confirmation.
Yeah.
And up to recently, it was you were 16 or older when you received it. So I had confirmation people, and I gave kind of a similar talk. And I'd always invite a teenager to come up next to me. I'd say to him, I'm going to tell you 2 stories. And you're going to tell me which one you like better. Okay? So he comes up to me. Okay? So the 2 stories start off the same. There's a poor peasant boy who goes to bed. And a magic fairy comes and visits him and says to the poor peasant boy, if you find the golden crown, you will marry the princess and inherit the kingdom. Okay? That's the common thread. Story number 1. Peasant boy wakes up, opens up his hut, walks 10 steps, trips, there's a golden crown. So he marries the princess and inherits the kingdom. That's story 1. Okay? Story 2. The little peasant boy gets up, walks out to his hut. He gets trapped in a haunted forest. He gets shipwrecked on an island. He gets wrongfully imprisoned and has to escape. He has to fight pirates, and he has to slay a dragon. And then he gets the golden crown. Okay? So I asked the teenager next to me, which story do you like better? And they say, oh, the second one, it's much more interesting. And I go, well, yeah, but that's kind of brutal of you, right? I mean, put yourself in that story, all right? Let's see which one you like better if you're in the story. Yeah, it's easy to say, yeah, some poor Slav is fighting pirates, that's a great story. But if I'm in the story, which one do I like better? And he says, yeah, the first one, right? Either way, I get the kingdom. I might as well just find the crown as opposed to fight stuff, right? I say, yeah, that's true. Good call, good call. All right, how about in the middle of the story? Well, I want 1. What story 1? I say, yeah, that's probably right? You've already fought the pirates and escaped from prison, but you haven't, you haven't killed the dragon yet, okay? So that's probably true. Now, let's talk about the clincher. It's the end of the story, okay? You, teenager in the story, have married the princess. You've inherited the kingdom. You're sitting on the throne, and these adorable kids are on your lap saying, Daddy, tell me a story about how you got the kingdom. Which story do you be part of? Right? And a teenager always says, number 2. Right? The suffering, it's over. I want to be part of a meaningful story that I can tell my kids. Right?
Wow.
Our lives are like that too, right? We don't get shipwrecked. We don't fight dragons. We don't fight pirates. Right? Yeah. But we face equal struggles, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We face even more heroic battles. Right? Abandonment by a parent or a spouse.
Come on.
Mental and physical abuse. Addictions, rejection, cancer, illness, loss of a job. But here's the beauty. Okay? The beauty of Christianity is wherever you are in the story, you get to choose the ending.
Amen.
That's the gift of Jesus.
Amen.
That's the gift of Jesus on the cross.
Hallelujah.
Unlike the peasant boy in the second story, right? Whatever struggles you faced in your life, whatever struggles you have yet to face, you get the kingdom. Right?
Amen.
You just got to ask for it.
Hallelujah.
Christ on the cross gave us that gift. What gift? The gift to choose the ending of our story.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Whatever sufferings we have faced, focus on the ending. Choose the right story. Get the kingdom.
Yes.
That's happy, but you know what? Most of us don't choose the kingdom. Right? In the grand scheme of things, we as humans should fear just 3 things. Suffering, separation from comfort. Death, separation from body. Sin, separation from God. Suffering and death, which is separation from comfort and body, that's nothing compared to separation from God. I constantly have to remind myself to examine my life to make sure I have my priorities straight. Yeah. I need to focus on the big picture. Avoiding separation from God and not screwing around with avoiding separation from comfort. Let's face it. Separation from comfort and body, that's the little stuff. Little in the sense that it's finite, right? The length of my human life. Separation from God, that's a lot longer. Yes. We think that the concept of evil and suffering contradicts the notion of an all-powerful, all-good God. In reality, the omnipotence of God solves the problem of evil and suffering. Why? Because it enabled God, because God divinely brings good out of suffering. St. Paul writes the most profound words I've ever read in my life. Romans 8:28. In all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. In all things. Bad things and good things. Painful things, suffering things, all things. God works for your good if you allow Him and love Him. St. Paul did not write, all things are good. No. He wrote that in all things, God works for your good. Maybe not short-term good. But we all put up with short-term struggles for long-term gain, right? Anyone athletes? Football players doing up-downs in 110-degree heat? They put up with that for long-term gain, being a better football player. My pain and suffering may not seem good, but it can always work out to my ultimate good if I let God in my life to work through me.
Amen.
And that's true even of stuff that God doesn't throw at me, like sickness and disease. Like the pain of surgery to remove a tumor. The short-term pain of the surgery, it's necessary, right? To spare us the long-term pain of the tumor. In our world today, our short-sighted, what have you done for me lately world, we only look to the short-term pain. And we ignore the long-term disease of sin. And again, remember, all pain and suffering on this earth is short-term. Our lives. The long-term is really long, eternity. So what an incredible gift. That God would allow us, little me, little you, to be part of His work of redemption. But think of the implications here. God's answer to the problem of suffering, it didn't just happen 2,000 years ago. God's answer, it's happening here and now. Here's something mind-boggling. You know what the solution to our suffering is? Our suffering. What a gift from God. To give our suffering meaning. To allow us to lift up. To join with the sufferings of His Son. To give our suffering the ability to be part of His work of redemption. What an incredible concept. God, our Creator, the eternal Lord, Lord of the universe, loved us so deeply that He came to be one of us. To suffer and die with us, like us. Dying, He paid the price of sin for us. Bore the burdens of sin for us. He paid with His blood and His life to redeem us.
Yeah.
And the really good part, by rising again, He transforms death from an end to beginning, from a hole in the ground to a door to heaven.
Yeah.
And so when each of us, the next time we suffer, and we will, could be tonight, could be now, listen to me. When we suffer and say, hey, what do I have to be thankful for? Simple answer is this. What do I have to be thankful for? God, given to me eternally.
Yeah.
That's all. Infinite joy in heaven. Purchased by Jesus at infinite cost. That's all. Amen, brother.
Amen.